Hi, everybody. We're going to wait for folks to get in, wait for the participant count to come up. It seems to have slowed down. It's okay to get started. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar regarding addressing barriers to employment in substance use disorder recovery. I'm Jen Kimball. I work for Maine Medical Center's Department of Vocational Services, and we've worked in collaboration with DHHS and the Department of Labor and the Northeastern Workforce Development Board to bring an EMDC, don't want to forget EMDC specifically, to bring you this webinar to share resources about addressing barriers to employment for folks that you serve. To quickly, before we hop into the agenda, want to let you know that as you probably heard or saw, this is being recorded, just so you're aware. The good news about that is that you will have access to this later. So we will be sending out, or rather Lorena from AdCare will be sending out this information afterward. And I believe it will be available for use in your presentations to staff, et cetera, if folks weren't able to make it today. Also, housekeeping, please know that if you have questions and answers, we will be presenting those at the end. We will wait and answer questions at the end of the presentation. If we do not have enough time to address those, we will be answering them, but we'll send those answers out separately. So just type them in the Q&A as opposed to the chat so that we'll have a record of that and we will get to them at the end. Anything else? Certificates and evaluations will go out after this. You will receive that. That's how you'll get your CEUs if that's something that you are looking for. And transcripts, there's a live transcript available that you would be able to enable at the bottom of the screen using that little CC box if captioning is something that you're looking for. Okay. In terms of agenda today, it's pretty full. I'll start off by summarizing the last webinar that we had in terms of the importance of work to recovery. We'll share with you results of an ad hoc survey we did talking to providers of medication-assisted treatment or other substance use disorder treatment out in the community right here in Maine. Summarize what those barriers are that we heard from all of you, and then invited DOL, EMDC, and the Northeastern Workforce Development Board to talk about an initiative that they're all working under that addresses a lot of the barriers that we've heard from you. And then it'll come back to me and I'll tell you a little bit about some generally available resources that we will also be sending out to you via email and probably even dropping in the chat. So that is the summary of the agenda today. So Dr. Feller's webinar from last month, hopefully a lot of you had an opportunity to participate in that. I found it to be very helpful to hear from a physician, an addiction psychiatrist specifically, around how important work is to substance use disorder recovery. In addition to his specific comments, SAMHSA itself recognizes how important work is to recovery and has released a specific document. It's called a TIP document, Treatment Improvement Program document, about integrating substance abuse treatment with vocational services. It is 250 pages long, so we did not send that out to everybody, but it is available online at the SAMHSA website, and I would strongly encourage anybody who's a provider of treatment to take a look and look at things that might be helpful in terms of integrating conversations around employment there. So Dr. Feller's comments noted that work gives somebody opportunities for that social connection, socialization with people who are not using substances and really talks about recovery capital and that role in society that is very valued, reduces the chance of relapse because of that structure, that meaning of being an employee and doing that work. And obviously the income for paying those bills and not needing to resort to other opportunities for income. And work is actually one of the best predictors of a positive treatment outcome for the reasons that he noted below. Even though it's important, barriers to employment exist, as we all are aware. And we're going to try to not get overwhelmed by this list that we'll bring up on the screen. Obviously, active use, it results in many challenges to obtaining or maintaining employment. Gaps in employment makes it difficult to explain to employers that work history makes it difficult to have references for new jobs. Lots of folks have involvement with the criminal justice system, which adds another layer of challenge. And then the stigma of having used substances and all that the world out there believes about people who use. And then probation and treatment program requirements we know can get in the way, especially in terms of scheduling, trying to navigate employment schedules with treatment schedules. And then there are another lack of resources to transportation and childcare, something consistent with people who live in poverty and people in rural areas, which, as we know in Maine, covers quite a bit of folks that we work with. In addition, there are individual person level barriers in terms of education, interpersonal skill, motivation to work, job skills, and computer skills. So these two slides were all a summary of what Dr. Fellers had to say in his last webinar, which is also, I believe, available to folks. If you want more details, you can take a look at that when you have an opportunity. So our ad hoc survey of providers in Maine told us that there are a couple of categories that are in alignment with what Dr. Fellers described. So resource barriers, transportation, the ever-present barrier in Maine, actually finding help with job seeking, again, childcare, and this concept of recovery friendliness of employers. How aware are employers of substance use disorder and recovery? Do their policies recognize the complexities related to that? Are they open and willing to have the conversation, and how to move forward really in talking with employers? And then individual knowledge barriers of the folks that you are serving. What do they know about the potential types of jobs out there? Have they only worked in one particular area and they know they can't go back? What options they know are available? What does the labor market actually need? What kind of skills do employers out there need right now? Do they have those skills to actually potentially obtain those jobs? And then a really big one, I'm sure you've all heard about, is how do they talk with employers about their gaps in employment, about potential legal involvement, about recovery and their commitment to recovery, and any sort of scheduling needs that they have. So these were very consistent with what Dr. Fellers described, but got a little bit more detailed specifically around these knowledge barriers. So I'll hand it off to Doug to talk about the Connecting with Opportunities initiative. This initiative really addresses a lot of the resource barriers and some of the knowledge barriers as well. And it's something that's available across the state.
Great. Well, thank you, Jennifer. My name is Doug Dunbar. I work at Eastern Maine Development Corporation. And first, I want to thank you, Jennifer, and everyone at Maine Medical Center and the Department of Health and Human Services and AdCare for making this possible. If you didn't see Dr. Feller's presentation, I believe it was recorded as well. Please take a look at it. It was excellent, and it sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about here today. In fact, I've meant to contact Dr. Fellers and see if he'll come into our organization and give his presentation to my coworkers in the Workforce Development Division at Eastern Maine Development Corporation. So I'm here just sort of to set the stage and maybe give a little flavor to what you're about to hear more from about the Connected with Opportunities initiative from Lori McDonald from the Maine Department of Labor. I'll give you a little background. This initiative is called Connecting with Opportunities. I was fortunate to be able to name it. And I named it that because I went to jail in 2017. My mental illnesses that I kept a secret from everyone in my life, from my childhood on, led eventually to self-medicating with alcohol, led to terrible decision-making, and led to 4.5 months in jail, followed by 15 months in the Penobscot County Adult Drug Treatment Court. I had spent 30 years in government. I was former Congressman John Baldacci's communications director for 8 years in Washington. I was his first press secretary in the governor's office, went on to be Maine's chief deputy secretary of state. And again, the only reason I say those things is because it all ended 4 years ago next month when I went to jail. And it opened my eyes to just a whole world of problems that I should have been paying attention to during my 30 years in government, but paid very little attention to. And one of them was, what kind of services and resources are available to the people that I'm surrounded with in jail? People in jail were like me. They needed help. Unlike me, so many of them were young, poor, and really didn't know where to access services. And so I kept thinking, who is connecting these young people with what they will need when they get out to move forward in life? Well, I was very fortunate that a former colleague of mine from the governor's office, Lee Humphrey, had become the president and CEO of Eastern Maine Development Corporation about the time that I went to jail. And he said, Doug, we're hiring, and I know about your new passion for helping people in recovery, people leaving jails and prisons, and we have this workforce development division. We can't help everybody with everything, but we can help many people with some very important things: education, training, employment. And he said, we're hiring. If you come to work with us, we'll do more outreach to the recovery community. And so I've worked at EMDC for the past 2.5 years. One of my first assignments, which was tremendous, was to work with Joanna Russell and the other executive directors of the Maine's 3 workforce development boards, and the Maine Department of Labor, and Gordon Smith with the Office of Opioid Response, and put together this Connecting with Opportunities initiative. And so we are providing a helping hand and substantial resources to individuals who are either personally impacted, have been personally impacted by opioid use disorder, or indirectly impacted. And Lori will tell you more about what that all means. But this initiative was created in 2019. Our funding, we were awarded $6.2 million. The announcement of that came just about the time COVID arrived in March of last year, February of last year. And so it slowed down the implementation of this, but we really got going last summer. And so we are aggressively enrolling people. And if you don't know someone who's been personally or indirectly impacted by the opiate crisis, you're very, very fortunate. And you're in an increasingly small segment of the population. So many people, so very many people have been impacted. We know that last year, 504 people died of an overdose in Maine, the greatest number ever. The numbers this year are even worse. Most of those overdose deaths involved an opioid. So many of us have been touched personally or indirectly. So I wanted to give you the background why I and my colleagues are so passionate about the work that we're doing. We want more referrals. We want to hear from you. And later on, we want to answer your questions. But right now, I will turn it over to Lori. And before I do that, she's with the Maine Department of Labor. I want to thank our labor commissioner, Laura Fortman, for being, not only a cheerleader, but really helping to move the proposal along in 2019, and for being a great leader behind the scenes. I mentioned Gordon Smith. He also has done tremendous work, not only with Connecting with Opportunities, but of course with so many other areas of prevention, treatment, and recovery in the fight against the opioid crisis. So Lori, I'll turn it over to you for sort of the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do.
Yes, thank you, Doug. And it's nice to be with all of you. I'm going to take a minute and share my screen. And as Doug said, I'm really here to provide the nuts and bolts of what Connecting with Opportunities is. So I hope that I can tell you as much as you might be, obviously we're more than happy to answer any questions that I may not get to as I go through my PowerPoint. So the Connecting with Opportunities initiative. So as Doug said, this is a grant that has come to the state of Maine. Its kind of official title is Maine's National Health Emergency Dislocated Worker Grant, focused on the opioid epidemic. So that's a long title, and I want to just take a minute to kind of break all of that down. So what this is, it is a grant from the U.S. Department of Labor, and that means it's a dislocated worker grant, and I'll talk more about that. It has the focus of really wanting to help individuals that have been impacted by the opioid crisis, whether they've been impacted personally or as an affected other, a family member, a friend, a spouse, a child. It is employment oriented, meaning that at its core, its goal is to really help people to enter either employment or education and training that would lead to employment. And because it is a grant that has come from the Department of Labor, the eligibility to be able to participate in this grant is based on employment status. Just a very tiny little bit of background. So in 2017, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services actually declared the opioid crisis a national public health emergency. Because of that declaration, states were able to receive funds for workforce needs that have arisen from this crisis. And that's why this grant is referred to as a disaster recovery dislocated worker grant. So again, the focus is on the crisis, and the core goal is to help individuals gain stability through access to employment, education, and training that will lead to employment, or a combination of both. Just a very quick overview. This is now a 3-year grant for with a maximum of $6.2 million statewide. Wonderfully, we were granted a 1-year extension. So now our time frame is, we were informed of the grant award in December of 2019, and we have through December of 2022 to provide services through this grant. Our original aim was to serve 683 people, and at this point we've enrolled about 2/3 of that amount. So again, what is the eligibility to be involved with this grant? So I'm going to say a little bit more about these things, but again, it's a labor grant. Eligibility is based on employment status. So somebody would either need to be a dislocated worker or a long-term unemployed individual, and I will define both of those things on my next slide. And then there's a couple of different pieces beyond that. One is that this grant is aiming to serve individuals impacted by the crisis directly or indirectly. But this grant can also serve individuals who are either dislocated or long-term unemployed. They may not have been impacted by the opioid crisis, but they are interested in going into occupational fields related to substance use disorder treatment and recovery. So non-impacted, but interested in working in this treatment and recovery field. So what exactly is a dislocated worker? It's a somewhat unique term, and I don't imagine everybody is familiar with it. So in short, you can simply think of it as someone who has lost their job through no fault of their own. They're laid off. They may be eligible for unemployment insurance. It also, in the case of this grant, means somebody that's out of work due to the opioid crisis. So something unique to this grant is if someone has been fired and they can show that it's directly related to the opioid epidemic in some way, they may be considered a dislocated worker. And then long-term unemployed refers to an individual that was once in the workforce and has been either unemployed for 27 consecutive weeks, which is just over 6 months, or they've been out of work for 27 or more non-consecutive weeks within a year-long period. Maybe they went back to work for a month and then that job finished. So 27 weeks, either consecutively or non-consecutively, would be long-term unemployed. And individuals who are currently incarcerated would fall into the category of long-term unemployed. So just again, to kind of recap with those definitions, if you're a dislocated or long-term unemployed person and you have been impacted by the opioid epidemic, either directly or indirectly, you can pursue any career field with the help of this grant. If somebody identifies as not having been impacted, then this grant could serve them by going into occupational fields related to substance use disorder and recovery. I wanted to provide a simple snapshot of what might some of those jobs be if somebody said, yes, I want to train so that I can go into an occupational field related to treatment and recovery. You all can read the list, but just some ideas: substance use disorder counselor, a certified prevention specialist, mental health and rehabilitation technician, even something like a community health worker or a registered nurse. If someone is expressing a desire to work in this field, the grant allows some broad flexibility in training if people identify as wanting to work in treatment and recovery. So I think this is important to point out. For the purposes of this grant, how do we know whether or not somebody has been impacted by the opioid crisis? And the way we know is simply through a self-identification or self-disclosure. So we would ask an individual simply this one question that you see on the screen. Your answer to this question is voluntary. Do you, a friend, or any member of your family have a history of opioid use? Please answer yes or no. So there are no follow-up questions. There's no documentation. It is simply a self-identification. So what can this grant provide? Because this is an employment-based grant, a workforce development grant, all of these services kind of will make sense in that context. So it can provide one-on-one career guidance. It can support individuals with everything from education, training, skills development, job search, overarching case management. So helping somebody holistically look at how can I move towards employment or education in my life. And then there is financial assistance that may be directly related to education or training. It may also be related to supportive services that could include transportation, childcare, clothing for work, equipment for work. And then I have here support from peer connectors. I'm going to say a little bit more about this, but I think a very important and wonderful piece of this grant is it has built-in peer support, a peer support role. And all of those of you that are working in substance use disorder and recovery know how important that peer support is. And so I will say more about that role. So I want to just jump back to Jennifer's presentation for a moment and pull forward some of those barriers that she mentioned, and then make an explicit connection between the things this grant can provide and how they could help to address those barriers. So for example, if an individual has barriers that include employment gaps and a poor work history, and they're unsure, how do I talk about those things? How do I talk about my criminal history? How do I talk about my scheduling needs related to recovery and reentry commitments? Well, some of what the grant provides is that one-on-one support. People are partnered with either a career advisor, workforce specialist, depending on the service provider, those roles. They're also paired with a peer support person. And so they really get very individualized support that can help them with career exploration, resume development, job search assistance, interview preparation and practice, and then just overarching support about how they would talk to an employer, specialized to their situation. And then the other thing the grant can help with is something called subsidized work experiences. And that is a situation where the service provider pays the participants' wages for a period of time. That can help somebody to build a current work history, a current reference source, and also kind of offers individuals a chance to regain confidence in the work world. And we can say that it kind of reduces the risk for an employer to hire someone on that period of time. A couple of other barriers: lack of transportation and childcare. As Jennifer said, we know these are ongoingly challenging for people. Part of what this grant provides are supportive services that are unique to each individual to really help them address their barriers to accessing employment or education. And then again, that peer support can really help them determine, how do I address my holistic needs, problem solving that. Going to that lack of education that people may have, well, this grant can provide financial assistance for education and training. That may be for tuition and books, it might be for a laptop. And lastly, we know, and it's already been stated, that a number of folks are also addressing issues related to justice involvement. And so we're seeing nearly 2/3 of who we're serving has histories of justice involvement or are currently incarcerated. So some of what this grant does is it has a collaborative approach with reentry providers. Again, it has that one-on-one support from grant staff that can help people address challenges. And those employments that the service providers have with employers can help provide those employment bridges. And that may be through some of those subsidized experiences or just helping people connect with employers for traditional work experiences. So just to say a little bit more about the peer connectors, this grant requires that individuals with lived experience of substance use disorder and recovery are hired. They can have as long as a 12-month period of employment with service providers or shorter. They provide outreach. They help orient participants through the eligibility and enrollment process, and they're really there to encourage and support participants while they are involved with the grant. And they themselves are enrolled and receiving the services of the grant. I just wanted to share this one quote from a peer connector up in Aroostook County. I think it really gives a sense of how this role is mutually beneficial, both for the peer support person and for those individuals that they're working with. So this person says, being in this peer support role has helped me grow and thrive as a person in recovery. It has given me the ability to connect with and help others who have traveled some of the same dark roads that I have. I will be able to continue helping others professionally thanks to this grant paying for my schooling to become a certified drug and alcohol counselor. The Connecting with Opportunities initiative has made it possible to turn heavy, traumatizing experiences into a beacon of hope for others, as well as myself. And throughout the grant, we have had 13 individuals who've been in that role, and they've just been absolutely tremendous. So far in the grant, we have enrolled 431 people. Approximately 60% of those have had some experience with the criminal justice system, and I just referenced that. Just to talk explicitly about how we work with currently incarcerated individuals, service providers are able to begin working with folks within 90 days of release. The aim is to connect that person with the service provider in the community or county where they will be settling once they re-enter. And then I just note here a few of the partners that we work closely with: the Maine Prisoner Reentry Network, Department of Corrections, the jail case management staff, pretrial adult drug courts. So who are the service providers for these grants, for this grant, excuse me. So Jennifer provided some resources for you, and she referenced the WIOA program. WIOA is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The service providers you see here provide those WIOA services overarchingly, and these are the service providers for this grant. And so in the coastal counties region, this is Workforce Solutions. In the 9 counties you see on the screen, it's Eastern Maine Development Corporation. And then in Aroostook County, it's Aroostook County Action Program. You will receive this PowerPoint and you will have all of these contacts. If you want to reach out to any of these folks for more information, please do. The one thing I want to highlight is these are the workforce development service providers in our state overarchingly for WIOA. So you can reach out to them now, absolutely related to the grant, but they will still be here providing workforce services even after this grant ends. So I just want to highlight that. It's important to remember. My last slide. What are the overarching goals? I told you the core goal of this grant. We have 4 overarching goals. Part of what we're doing here is building bridges between the worlds of workforce and recovery and reentry. So many of our referral partners are service delivery partners in the recovery world, recovery centers, recovery residences, treatment programs, et cetera. aiming to increase the skilled workforce in those occupational fields related to SUD and recovery, those track 2 folks. The core goal, supporting the reintegration of individuals impacted by the crisis into the workforce. And then lastly, creating those employment opportunities for individuals with lived experience. This is the last slide. I will invite anybody, please reach out to me with any questions. Here's my email and phone number. And if you would like for us to provide any more information for groups or staff that you're working with, we're always happy to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides here, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Joanna Russell from the Northeastern Workforce Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. And I will bring up my PowerPoint. There we go. All right. So thank you, Lori and Doug, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Great work. I have to say, I'm just so honored to work with our team regionally and statewide. It really makes a difference. Takes a village, and we're here. So to begin my presentation, I just want to say a little bit about the board. You've heard about barriers to employment relevant to the individual in recovery. Well, I'm going to share a bit of information related to a new initiative supported and endorsed by the Northeastern Workforce Development Board. And during this presentation, I'll show how businesses and human resource professionals can support recovery and improve their work environment. And as I'm sharing, I also want to say that a lot of the information that you will see, statistics and very detailed information, has been taken from SAMHSA and the National Safety Council as well. And you'll see that as we go through. So I do want to say a little bit about the Northeastern Workforce Development Board and just provide you with a little overview about what your local workforce board does. The Northeastern Workforce Development Board is a group of community leaders appointed by local elected officials, also known as the county commissioners. The Northeastern Workforce Board serves the 5 counties of the Northeastern region, which includes Aroostook, Hancock, Penobscot, Piscataquis, and Washington counties. The purpose of the board is to provide policy, planning, and oversight for workforce development programs and address workforce barriers as identified by businesses and our community. So in addition, we also work to link recovery with the workforce system. You heard Lori mention earlier service providers throughout the state. So here I have a map, and you have coastal counties in the southern region. Coastal counties service provider is Goodwill Industries Workforce Solutions. And then of course we have Central Western Maine, which is served by Eastern Maine Development Corporation. And then the upper part of the state, we have the Northeastern Workforce Region, which we have a Aroostook County Action Program in Aroostook County, and then Eastern Maine Development Corporation serving the remaining 4 counties. So what brings us here? As you heard about the barriers and services that are being provided to individuals, the information I'm going to provide you is really going to focus on employers. So as I go through these slides, I'm going to encourage you to think of it from the employer's lens, because what we're looking at is trying desperately and working hard to reduce stigma within the workplace. So a few important facts to consider. The deaths due to overdose increase our need for action. Let's build on the solution and notice one of the most beneficial ingredients to an individual's recovery capital is employment. When an individual has established a strong foundation of recovery and is ready to go back to work, we can work together and contribute to their success. A strong foundation of recovery is essential to an individual's ability to navigate employment responsibilities. This is the direct result of the work so many of you do each day in your jobs. So a little bit about recovery capital. Let's take a moment here to look at recovery capital from 3 points. personal, family, and social and community. This example comes from our recovery community. Recovery capital is the breadth and depth of internal and external resources that can be drawn upon to initiate and sustain recovery from severe alcohol and other drug problems. And that statement is from Granfield and Cloud. Notice the personal column. The first item on the list of recovery capital is employment. All other items underneath that are directly impacted by employment: housing, clothing, food, transportation, and physical health, etc. Once employed, individuals in recovery are able to contribute to their well-being, their family's well-being, and they become tax-paying citizens and directly contribute to their communities. When a person feels empowered, the other two areas, family and social and community, are directly impacted by recovery. The power of recovery is unending. And again, I just want to remind you that this is what we're showing to employers. So first, a bit about substance use disorder in the workplace. As you all know, SUD transcends all social class lines. It could affect your family, neighbor, or your colleague. Remember, addiction knows no boundaries, and more importantly, neither does recovery. The Northeastern Workforce Development Board supports recovery and recognizes there are multiple pathways to healthy, sober living. Let's all remember that substance use disorder is more present within our networks than many initially think, and we cannot be sure what challenges each person is undergoing. The National Safety Council estimates 75% of employers have been directly impacted by substance use disorder. And about 55% of people with substance use disorder today, they're currently working. And only about 25% of individuals with opioid use disorder are receiving treatment as needed. So substance use disorder, and I gotta move this. See if I can get that there. So our partners and businesses know all too well the challenges faced by the impact of SUD. Employers see in the workplace increased workplace injuries and errors, higher workers' compensation and healthcare costs. Employers see more absenteeism and turnover. They see decrease in employee morale. These points all give us good reason, and employers good reason, to stop and consider learning about the value of recovery. So we all know that SUD is having a huge impact on our state, in the state of Maine. It's a huge crisis. There's also, in tandem at the same time, a crisis with the decrease in our workforce, period. The death rate supersedes the birth rate in the state of Maine. We have outmigration by our young adults who are graduating from college looking for higher wages. So they're leaving the state and some coming back, but we're struggling with trying to keep them here. We also have to look at the fact that baby boomers are retiring and leaving these open positions. And then we top that with substance use disorder. So my point here is that we really have a good opportunity, timing and synchronicity, to present individuals in recovery who are hungry to go back to work. The timing, it's right, let's do it here. So we've just touched on issues that surface on the job. I also want to point out that other challenges here I just shared with you, that we need to consider that as we move on. So what is the Recovery Friendly Employer Initiative? First, the initiative started in New Hampshire and is sprouting up in multiple states across the US. And I want to assure you that I will be sending this PowerPoint and other resources to Jennifer and Lorena at AdCare so that they can get them out to you. The resources are geared to employers. There is value for you folks as counselors and case managers in knowing what we're presenting to employers so that you can also transfer that information off to your clients and job seekers. So in our local area, the Recovery Friendly Employers Initiative, it's an action and movement endorsed by the Northeastern Workforce Development Board to educate employers about the value of recovery, resulting in more opportunities for employment and in a recovery and producing a recovery-friendly environment. The following slides will highlight much of the information we share with employers. Just wanted to remind you that our primary goal here is to reduce stigma in the workplace by educating employers. So here I have a slide that just provides you with the three-step process that we use to engage, train, and recruit businesses and employers to be on our Recovery Friendly Employer list. And our list will be published on or about January 1st. What we're doing right now is getting our employers onto the list, making sure that they're trained. So this three-step process, first is simply submitting an interest form to the Northeastern Workforce Development Board. That form can also be found on our website. The second is to attend a brief workshop, which lasts about 20 minutes, to learn more about recovery and how it intersects with the workplace. We ask in the third step that employers notify their workforce that they are becoming a recovery-friendly employer and asking them to detail what that means for them. We do provide templates, email language for the employer to send out to their workforce as they wish. So the next thing we want to talk about is reducing stigma. The action to reduce stigma requires collaboration and community-wide action. And this, I want to point out, includes our employers, and we're making that prominent to them. So workplace culture could mean providing a sense of appreciation for the employee's well-being and recovery in general. Employers could develop policies that offer a safe environment with confidentiality and promotion of healthy habits. Employers could offer support to all employees with high regard for any situation requiring support and respect. So I do want to pause here for a minute, and I suggest that we compare our experience today with trying to help employers become recovery friendly with the same situation that we underwent decades ago with the no smoking movement. It was a slow process. Do you remember when restaurants split an open dining room into two and called one side non-smoking and the other side smoking? Well, look at us now. So I really want to point out, it takes work, it's a process, and what we're doing is bringing more and more employers and businesses on as recovery friendly. So the same can be said for us as we educate employers about the value of recovery and all the benefits. This information, if shared with people in recovery, can also go a long way to empowering them and showing the strength of recovery. So changing workplace culture. Remove the elephant in the living room. Talk about recovery. Recovery is not a bad word. Recovery is the solution to a horrible infliction upon individuals and their loved ones. We are asking employers to deliberately take the pulse and temperature of their workforce. How do they see recovery? We encourage employers to educate and advocate just like we're doing now. We practice what we preach and hopefully foster a positive work environment. So part of culture we know is language. Language matters. Why does language matter? Perkins and Repper argue that reducing a person to nothing more than their difficulties is one of the most damaging and dehumanizing forms of language. It denies the existence of any facet of the person any relevant role or characterization upon their diagnosis. It's the small changes that can have the biggest impact. Think about this when you're at the water cooler. Listen and consider how you might join the effort to reduce stigma one person at a time. So here I would just ask employers to consider the two lists and look at adopting the language under adopt. Let's see if I can get my, there we go. So adopting substance use or misuse, adopting the term recovery, person in recovery, recovery community, medicated assisted treatment is recovery, and abandon the language on the left, abandoning abuse, self-help, alcoholic, addict, consumer, clean or dirty, replacement therapy. So here, I do want to point out, and we inform and educate our employers, letting them know that we have samples and connections to resources that will enable them to look practically at their policies and implement procedures that encourage and strengthen recovery within the workplace. And you'll see at the top, you know, we talk about being willing to find understanding around employment gaps and criminal records that stem from substance use. So here we do point out that we've been successful in the state of Maine around banning the box, asking people on applications about their criminal history. What I want to point out, though, is that that is the start. You know, that's the beginning, and we have to continue our work to help educate employers and businesses about the value of recovery, because whether the person checks that box off or not, before being hired, there's still going to be that legal background where they look at the record of arrests and prosecutions. So we want to encourage employers to explore what has happened during those gaps, what accomplishments has a job candidate actually experienced, and how does that actually connect to the job that they're applying for. And on the service provider's end, they are teaching the job seeker how to respond to these interview questions. I just did a panel presentation for the Northeast Society of Human Resource Managers last week. And one of their questions was, does this mean if I become recovery friendly that I have to hire people in recovery? And what I said is, that is not what you're committing to. You are committing to being open-minded and learning about the value of recovery so that you can look at a resume that might have gaps in work experience and be willing to bring the person in to explore the accomplishments in those gaps. Give the person a chance to talk about what they have done since they left incarceration and re-entered into your community. Here we also look at ensuring policies that foster a safe and stable work environment. Handle relapse and drug use as you would any medical condition. Provide managers and employees training and education around recovery, and what does that actually mean? And engage employees in education, prevention, and treatment. So here I've provided, and we do talk with employers about the benefits for employers and the benefits for our community and recoveries. So looking at the benefits for employers, employees notice that when an employer notifies their workforce that they're recovery friendly, they notice that management cares about their well-being. It does result in improved morale, higher attendance, less turnover, broader job applicant pool, because we're now tapping into those folks in recovery, and connection to job seekers within the recovery community. So how does this benefit the community? It helps people in recovery, get back on track. It reduces the stigma associated with substance use disorder, and it helps others know that success is possible. So the board is willing to help. The staff are always available to provide further policy guidance, situational advice, and connections to external resources. And I do want to point out that we are all about connecting people to the right resources, connecting people to our service providers, EMDC and ACAP, or the recovery center, if that might be the case. Also having connections to treatment as appropriate. So we do review current policies. We provide resources for sample policies and procedures and connection to community resources, provide situational advice. We tailor workshops for workplace leadership. And then if needed, we will tailor the workshop for employees. Here I've provided links to resources that might be very helpful. And again, I encourage you, this PowerPoint will be sent out to you. Take a look at these. It really does help to know what kind of education is taking place out there for employers. I am available anytime for questions, either through a telephone call or email. Let's see, I do want to take a look at I think at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jennifer Kimball.
Thank you, Joanna.
Here.
Can I ask a clarification point for you before you mute yourself?
Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
For the Northeastern Workforce Development Board's Recovery Friendly Employer Initiative, is that limited to employers who are in your region, or is that a statewide initiative?
That's really a good question. Our focus here in the Northeast region, of course, is we're reaching out deliberately to the employers in the Northeast region. I actually met with the Maine Tourism Association yesterday, and I just want to say out loud, I talk constantly with our state partners. I am hoping that this will roll out to a statewide initiative. We're serving kind of as a pilot at this point, getting out there and looking at the interest and involvement. So I feel pretty confident that this will roll out as a statewide, but I will absolutely post and provide education to any business that's interested in this right now, Jennifer.
Okay, thanks, Joanna.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, I've been monitoring, as you have and others, the chat and the Q&A, and I think we've answered most questions, but we still have a few minutes and we would welcome more questions. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of key points, that even if you know someone who might not be eligible for Connecting with Opportunities, perhaps they're working, and you have to be a dislocated worker to be eligible for Connecting with Opportunities. Perhaps they're working, but earning very little. We would still love to hear from those people, because the Connecting with Opportunities initiative is one of several workforce development programs available statewide. So I always tell people, if you know anyone who is unemployed or working but earning very little, and one of the ways we know if someone's eligible, potentially, more than likely, is if they receive SNAP benefits, food stamps. So again, if you know anyone who's unemployed or working but earning little and really feels they would benefit from some support, financial assistance to move forward, they should absolutely get in touch with me or one of my coworkers around the state who are with one of these service providers. Again, there are various programs and we want to hear from more people.
Thanks, Doug. I want to take this opportunity in the last few minutes we have to reference the documents that were shared in the chat, I believe, and we'll go out. So we've heard about a couple of programs that are specific to this population, and I'll begin again and say I work at Maine Medical Center's Department of Vocational Services, and we operate a program that has been supporting people who are clinically eligible for Section 17 or Section 92 behavioral health services. So we've been working with this population for the mental health population for decades. And there's a significant amount of overlap for folks who have co-occurring disorders or have similar backgrounds and barriers. So we were requested to pull together a couple of webinars specific to this population in coordination with DHHS. And now we're going to pivot to just share with you some of the resources we've learned about over the years that will help you as a provider engage in conversations with people to help them along their pathway to recovery and toward employment. This is a brief overview. I know we don't have much time, but the handouts that are shared will give you some details. So Joanna mentioned Ban the Box, and that is something that is right now happening. I believe October, this will be the law that Maine employers will not be able to ask about a criminal history on an application. As Joanna mentioned, that's something different than once somebody's decided they'd like to hire somebody. Of course, that will become part of the conversation. But as that conversation moves forward, you also have the option of the federal bonding program, which is something that employers can have some insurance, basically, for folks that they perceive as at risk or a potentially risky hire. If there's a legal background or a substance use background, there's specific eligibility for that, but it's super easy, which a lot of employers don't know about. It's a very easy program for them to access, and there's information about that program in the handouts that we sent. And there's lots of information about how to frame that criminal background and how to disclose that. So that is also in the information that we're sending, in addition to the programs that were already spoken about. If you're just engaging with somebody one-on-one, there are tools that they can use. Speaking of which, another tool that is available is something called Maine Can Work. This is something that was developed several years ago, is updated relatively regularly. We're a little behind, 2020 messed everybody up a little bit. But this guidebook is really saying, where are you on the pathway to employment and thinking about employment? Are you at a stage where you don't think anybody's going to hire you? Are you at a stage where you don't know where the services are? Are you at a stage of you have a job, but you want a better job? There are worksheets and resources, activities, discussions that can happen using this tool between peers, with individuals themselves. And I would encourage you to take a look at that document, which is available online. Also in these handouts that you will receive or have seen are kind of guidance around the stages of change and where somebody is thinking about employment, and prompting questions or activities that you can do to help somebody move forward in their process of change toward employment. And some very concrete guidance around specific barriers and what can address those barriers, whether it's employment resources specific to Maine, or whether it's those individual or knowledge resources that we've already talked about, that those sort of guiding tools available to you. So those are in the information you will receive. It's 1 o'clock. I believe at this point, it means we don't have time for Q&A to help. But I do thanks to Doug. I think we've answered a lot of the questions along the way. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
And if folks have questions that are lingering in the Q&A, those can get answered after the fact. I'll open it up to anybody else to say a quick word to wrap up if you'd like.
Just thank you again, Jennifer, and thanks everybody for your attention and participation. Really appreciate all the great attendance here today.
Thank you. Do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.